Welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. This is our 46th episode, talking about a new movie. If you follow me on Twitter, you know that I've been taking this controversy a little bit seriously, because how can we, as a society, function if a dramatization of a real event omits a small portion of it in favor of a serious moment that adds depth and emotional impact to one of the most important scenes in history? I'm talking, of course, about the new movie First Man, which has received a considerable amount of flack for omitting a scene, which we all know the scene, having seen the video footage at some point in a history class or a science class or something like that, because it's a monumental occasion, which I work with people who don't believe actually happened, but that's neither here nor there. Now, the moon landing. The scene that they omitted, of course, is the planting of the flag. Now, let's talk about number one, why this is a ridiculous controversy, and get this out of the way early. Ridiculous controversy because the scene is actually in the movie. They don't show a flag being planted, but they do show a flag on the moon. There are so many flags in this movie that you would have thought that it was a movie called Independence Day or something like that. And somehow, short of the speech from Independence Day being in this movie, that's the only way this movie can get more patriotic. I think one of the other issues people have is that it diminishes the role of the moon landing. That I can see. It does diminish the role of the moon landing in bankrupting the Russians trying to imitate during the Cold War, because it does show that like people were protesting, people weren't pro that, but they put it into the context of it was during the era of Vietnam and they didn't know what to do, and there was a lot of people were like, why are we putting so much trust in the government? The government's actively lying to us. So if you've seen like the Post, you know what the general time period was like. So yeah. I don't know. That's the least of the concerns with this movie. The other concerns, there aren't many. It's a pretty solid movie. Ryan Gosling has a great performance as, as Neil Armstrong, which is really who the movie's about, because even Buzz Aldrin gets, very little time. Corey Stoll playing Buzz Aldrin. The trailers are very misleading, so if you were looking at the trailers and seeing, June Armstrong, or, I think her name was June, flipping a shit constantly, like Ray Donovan's wife, then you're gonna be, disappointed if you're looking for that in this movie, because really the only time she has, like, that meltdown in the trailer is about as long as the trailer, and it's with good reason, considering her neighbor across the street died in the Apollo 1 incident. So it's a well-founded fear she has that the trailer makes it seem like she's just being an overbearing, naggy wife. But considering there are all these other dead astronauts before them that they knew and they were friends with and they had dinner with and stuff like that, it makes sense that she would be this way. So that's another problem. That really just promotional material for this movie. I think I talked about that earlier this year with Mission Impossible Fallout. What else have I got for this movie? The score is very good. The music is very good. The sound mixing is not, which is surprising considering the movie is directed by Damien Chazelle of La La Land and Whiplash. The sound mixing, if you ask me, you can't really hear the dialogue, and I think that's to effect, because the dialogue that's being covered up is not dialogue that's important to me as a viewer, because I don't understand what the science is behind it. And the times that this happens it's to create a sense of, like a frantic sense within the cockpit of first the Gemini and then in the Apollo mission. Because like that's one of the best parts of this movie is we know the history. We know Neil Armstrong's gonna live. We know he's going to come and he's going to go. Like, we knew he was going to survive the Gemini. We knew he was going to survive the Apollo. But the movie still creates this sense of not dread, but suspense, where you feel like you don't know what's going to happen, because like I didn't know the story of I didn't know he was on a Gemini before he was on Apollo 11. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, he's going to survive this, because obviously he goes on to walk on the moon. And when they're talking about, when they're doing that whole scene, because there are so few windows on these spacecraft, it's very hard to see anything in these scenes. And they do it with such good effect that you're kind of just not confused, but just like anxious the entire time, because it goes out of its way to not give you visual or sound information about what's going on. And another thing that the movie does very well is it creates a sense of like unease and like anxiety about being in it, because a lot of it when they're in the modules, the way it's shot makes it feel like you're in it too with them, and there's a lot of creaking and stuff like that, which is a noise that like you would hear in like Titanic, but you know the Titanic's sinking. This is not the Titanic. This is but there's a lot of like metal creaking on metal and things like that just creates a sense of unease that you're basically in a rundown vehicle, which it's not. It's a top of the line vehicle at the time, but keeping in mind it's 1968 and it's not as 1969, and it's not as high quality as we would have spacecrafts today. And another scene that they actually shot very well that I liked was the when the Apollo 1 goes up in flames and it kills all the astronauts. They tell you his neighbor, who is Jason Clarke, he tells him, oh, I'm going to be on the Apollo 1. And then we, the audience who know what the Apollo 1 is, are like, holy shit, he's going to end up dying. So they're going through the mundane, and then it cuts to Neil Armstrong at the White House talking to people about how it's safe. And then it cuts back to them. And it does a very good job of just building tension of dramatic irony, because we know what's going to happen. The people in the movie don't. So it's a great dramatic irony is something that's great for building tension in scenes like this, and they do it very well. And then, as you know, if you've listened to my review, my Peter and Josie's review of Miracle, you know that I'm a sucker for this. When they overlay, and instead of using the actor's dialogue, they use the original dialogue, because they do it at the end of Miracle, where they slowly phase out the actors playing the commentators and play the actual "Do You Believe in Miracles" track from the end of the movie. They do this here too, where there's a scene where at the end, with one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, that they play Neil Armstrong's actual voice telling that, but remastered to match the movie's quality. And then there was one other thing I wanted to do. I didn't take notes this time because it was a crowded theater. It's not like All About Nina, where there was like I was the only one in the theater, I think. The scenes of him with his family, it makes you feel like you're there as well, because the entire thing is shot like it was shot on a home video camera. Anytime that they're together, it looks like it's shot on a home video camera, so it looks like you're being privy to information behind the scenes that's more private, and it feels more intimate in that way. Not in a voyeuristic sense, but more like you're, what's it called? You are, like, it feels like you're watching a documentary rather than a movie when they show things in that way. So yeah, we'll wrap it up there for today. I saw this movie in IMAX. Definitely worth seeing in IMAX. The sound, just for the way the sound works in the movie, that makes it worth seeing in IMAX alone. So if you are on the fence about seeing this movie, then go see it. If you're on the fence about seeing this movie because of the American flag being in the movie, don't worry, there are plenty of flags in the movie. You're fine. They didn't forget that it was an American who did this. Don't worry about it. We know America was involved. So, go see the movie. If you're upset that they don't show him actively planting the flag, then you're not going to be happy. And if that's something that concerns you, you probably aren't listening to this podcast. Anyway, so we'll wrap it up there for this week. For the third episode of the week, we did A Star is Born. For the Monday episode, I did a little bit early. Then we did All About Nina, and now we're wrapping it up with First Man. Next week, we'll start off the week with Bad Times at the El Royale. So we'll be back with that on Monday.